Okay, so now let me just get this going on my phone. Got a little delayed. Okay, it's muted. All right. Okie dokie. So, what we had going on yesterday was this loop that you see here. Painted red with a palette knife and then painted some elements on top of that. And so, I think what I want to mess with today is maybe transition it to yellow. I also like the idea of it just sort of being painted solid, and I have these like whiteout dealies. Let me turn off this image for a second. Where I don't have anything that's great for displaying this. It's a bit bright. Let's go one darker. Okay. These guys where it's not best one-handed where the thing's solid as well. But okay, that worked okay. Where it's dry. Like, it is a much faster thing to work with than using whiteout or paint. But possibly having like solid red painted on one side and then coming back and just filling out the rest of it. And going from there, I don't know. But regardless, I need to do some transitional bit, and for that I need to get into painting some red on some transparency or something. Or I could do red on a white background. No, I'll do transparency. So that'll be first stages, and then I'll figure it out a little bit from there, but I wanted to mix up what it was that I was working with. I could also color it red and have that as a transitional bit. I don't know how I would best go about that. Just maybe less red and more red on the front end. I might do that. And then I have something to contrast against. Okay, I think I might do that. So I'm gonna mess with these. It's just like whiteout strip stuff. It doesn't have to dry, but it adheres to plastic and such. It's not perfect, but it'll do well for what I'm looking for. So right now I'm scanning what I just animated. I'll scan it twice, once on the reverse side that doesn't have as pronounced a uh, feeling of the animation because the whiteout that I just used is on the back side. And then I'll scan the front side where the whiteout is on the surface, on the front surface, and you'll be able to see that more clearly. And then I'll add something else once I finish scanning it in its current state. Right now what you're seeing in Photoshop is just an alignment grid for once the scans are done. Pull them into here. This is running slowly. I'm going to quit Photoshop once I save this stuff. And then reopen it. How to scan your frames and make it into an animation, it really depends on how you're working. If you're working like I've been working on these, there's a little bit of prep work on the front end and some alignment stuff and such. Let me finish saving these as GIFs. It'll take like maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and then I'll walk you through a little bit more step by step. I'm only doing 2 of these as animated GIFs. Okay, so here are the 2 sides of the thing that I just animated, front and back. If you are watching, it's a little bit harder to see with all the colors present, but it's primarily white, red. You can see that it's the same thing, just sort of on either side. Yeah. So some things come through, some things don't. And on this top one here, the red that's on this bottom one here isn't present because I didn't want to wait for everything to dry, so I just scanned on the one side. So let's go through like how I have this set up for scanning and importing and stuff for saving out individual frames. So I have this printout that I made that is based on a Photoshop document that I made where each still is a 16 by 9 scale or aspect ratio, and there are these little marks in the corner that are the crop marks / what I use as registration marks. So when I paint, sometimes I paint directly on the printout, but more recently I've been messing more with using transparency. So on the transparency, I will mark out these 8 crop marks, 8 crop marks in in all the corners, and I'll use those when I scan to square up the image and crop it down to what will then be brought into what is like this guy. So I paint the stills in order. I'm not sure how best to... Okay, paint the stills in order that go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. So this is one, each of these little rectangles is its individual still. And once I have that scanned in, I have this guy. Let me pull one open. That's what I'm doing on stream. So this is a transition one. So this is rotated 90 degrees just because that's how it scans in. You can adjust that if you want for your scanner, what have you. But this is scanned and you can see those crop marks, those registration marks. Sometimes I have to rotate the image in order to get it squared up. Sometimes I don't. I think for this one I was able to just drag over my ruler or my guide and it's pretty accurate. And then do that on the other guys as well. And once I have those in place, let me zoom out a little bit. Let me do fit screen. I'm doing this one-handed, which is slower. So those are the registration marks, and I can crop it down. It'll be a little bit incorrect according to my guide thing over here. So what I need to do is I already have this set up to where when each of these rectangles at a certain scale, or each of the stills that I've drawn, when I scale them down to this size, each of these rectangles will be 1920 by 1080. So I need to adjust the size of this a tiny bit accordingly. If you are making your own alignment sort of thing, you need to be aware of what resolution you want the final thing to be. In my case, I'm just doing it 1080 and scanning at 1200 DPI, which I did the math at some point, but it means that each of these needs to be like 1.5 inches wide, a little bit more, and a little less than an inch tall, so that when I scan it, I have something larger than 1920 by 1080. So this is a little bit larger, so then I will adjust the image size to be the exact size of my template, which is 12,000 pixels wide by 9,000 pixels tall. It's not a huge difference. At this scale, I'm working pretty tight. And then I copy that image into my template that I've made. And I made this template by figuring out how many frames I wanted, what scale I needed them to be at, etc., and then creating this guide. So let me make a new one, because I already know what the width is. I'm gonna go ahead and put this in, but it was some math and like finagling and seeing like what gaps I needed. Initially I had these with much smaller area between each of the frames, but what would happen is the shadows would intersect with one another pretty distinctly, pretty noticeably, and so I made them a little bit wider and the actual frame size a little bit smaller. So this is a blank Photoshop document that is 12,000 by 9,000, and I need to go to View, Guides, New Guide Layout, and within the guide layout you have a variety of options. Because of all, I did the math ahead of time, it's meant to be 5 columns. The width is 1920, and the gutter, I do not remember offhand. I think it's like 550 or something. No, it's a little more. Is it 600? I think it might be 600. And then I have the appropriate bit there. And then rows, the height is 1080. What's 9,000 minus 1080 times 6 divided by 5? That was the math that I had to do before. So the 9,000 is a little bit arbitrary. It's just an easier thing to remember because I'm resizing things all the time. Calculator. I just need to do this math quick. 9,000 minus 1080 times 6 is 2,520 divided by 5 is 504. So the gutter here is 504. And you can see with the guidelines I have this thing set up. And the next step is coming over to crop tool, dropping down, and actually doing slice tool. And what we'll be doing, can you do slices from guides? Let me undo this because there's a weird thing for exporting. You can do slices from guides and that'll give you whatever, but what I want to do is create my own guides so that when I export I can make a selection, toggle something where it's user slices. So I'm just using the guides and drawing out each of these sections so that these are the ones that I've made, which they take on a certain attribution to them. This is how I made that last guy. Just dragging within each of these 1920 by 1080 sections. And they are all a dark blue, which means that it's a user-generated slice. And these are just guides. This is something that's antiquated. This would have been much more helpful if you were doing web design in like the early aughts. When web design was like you had a large image and you might have different actions that were attributed to the individual image sections built out on a grid. But anyway, you have that, and you can't see these next steps, so I'm just going to describe them, just how stuff is set up. I don't want to share my entire screen because sometimes I have like projects and stuff that are in the background, but so now you have all these slices. So individual slices. Let's do. Just select that one. Doesn't really matter. But let me paste in that thing that I just messed with. So you can see that this matches with this guide that I just made, where more or less you can see where the frames are, and there's a little bit of a overlap on the edge. That's intentional so that you can fill in something completely without having to be like precisely up to the edge. So I've got the stills that I made and scanned. They're imported in. I adjusted them. I've got this guide layout that I created. And now I'm going to, this is the description part, go to File, Export, Save for Web, Legacy. The shortcut for that on a Mac is, Command Option Shift S. It's a long one. But File, Export, Save for Web. And you can't see what's popping up, but there's a few steps in this next stage that are necessary to save out these individual sections as stills. So I'll do my best to describe it. It'll take a while because this is not designed for this purpose. It's designed for things that are maybe at maximum like 1920 by 1080 a little bit taller maybe, but it's made for web. So the resolution, and it's older web tools, so very not this high resolution of stills. Saving this out, it's going very slow because it's trying to save this out as an animated GIF probably. And I have a large file open simultaneously, so apologies for the speed of this. You can't even see what's happening. I just have a pinwheel spinning. But all of these steps are saving out these individual cropped sections in sequence from one scanned file. It's a weird thing that works well for me in my process, but there's not like a huge need for it otherwise. Yeah, this is trying to save it out as an animated GIF. Okay, so my save for web thing popped up, and I need to zoom out to where I can see all of the stills that are present, or all the slices, and then click and drag to select all of them, and switch in the upper right. It'll say preset unnamed or something, and underneath that you have a file format, drop down to JPEG. You can also do PNGs or GIFs if you want, but JPEG is the best for my process of stuff. And what that will do is make it so all of these individual slices are selected simultaneously, and you're changing the format of all of them, not just one. I've made that mistake a bunch of times where I just go immediately to change what the format is, and it only affects the one slice. And then I'm going to click Save at the bottom. You can mess around with the quality and such. Mine is at maximum. Then you'll have a Save As window pop up, and you have a few different options. At the bottom of the save window, it'll say HTML and images only, HTML only. I'm only dealing with the images. If you wanted to, for whatever reason, you could save out the HTML, and that'll build out HTML code that puts all of these images into a grid. But I'm doing images only. Then underneath that you have a few different settings that you can do. I made a personal one because you can do custom to where it won't create a subfolder, but by default it'll make a second folder that'll be named index or images, I think. I forget, I haven't done it in a while. And then underneath that, the reason why I clicked out all of those individual slices is there's a slices drop down, and you can select all user slices, and that will only do the ones that you clicked and dragged on. I'm just going to make a subfolder that's test in here, and I'll have untitled, and then I'm going to click save, and it will export all of those individual slices as individual image files. Now there's another step depending on how you're processing these images into an animation. If you're, say, bringing them into Photoshop to make an animated GIF, you don't have to change the file naming of the files. But if you are importing them into Premiere or After Effects, when you save out the individual slices, it generates slices that fill out the entire space. So you can't see probably in the window, but I'm just going to write on top of this thing. When you have a slice and you click one, it'll automatically name the first one as slice 01. But then if you're coming over here and clicking, this slice is not slice 2. Slice 2 is actually right here. So that's slice 2 numerically, and this one becomes slice number 3. And it follows that file naming convention when you export the slices. So So you'll need to rename the slices if you want to do it as an image sequence in Premiere or After Effects, because otherwise it will give a gap for whatever number that is. It makes sense, but it also is annoying. But if you're working exclusively in Photoshop, you can import the images into a stack by going File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack, File, Script, Load Files into Stack, and that'll pop up with a window. So let me go to where I just saved all those images. That's under GIFs, Test. And I'll open these and then hit OK, and it will load in order the files that I exported. But I don't know where it's easiest to see, but if you look at the layer names or the top of the window name, it'll say what layer is selected, and it's the file name. And so the first one is untitled underscore 01.jpg. But if I click the second layer, it's underscore 03, which is this one right here. And so because it just does it in order as best as possible for Photoshop, so if there's not a 2, it just doesn't have a 2. But if you're working in Premiere or After Effects and do import image sequence, it'll have a blank frame for that interstitial bit, because it is like, you should have this here. So what I do in that case is I go into let me pull this up in my Finder window. I go and I have a longer naming convention that is good for me, and I select those files in my Finder window. I right click them and go down to rename, and I have it set to the naming format to be name and counter. Name is after name, start with frame number 1, and then you name it whatever you want to, and then it will put them in numeric order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 up to 9,999. But back here in Photoshop, you need to have, when you import these stills into a stack, it'll have them with the lowest number as the top layer, and after that you'll need your window to have timeline visible. So you go window, scroll down to timeline, and that's what this lowest window is. This guy down here, where it has a thing where you can click and you have 2 options in this drop down: create video timeline, create frame animation. Because we have these as individual frames, we're doing create frame animation. And then towards the top right of this window, there's another drop down menu, and you can make frames from layers, and then you have these as a sequence. But they are backwards, because when it creates a make frames from layers, it starts with the lowest frame, or the furthest back frame, and goes to the top frame. It also defaults to having no time on that it holds on each frame. So you need to do 2 things to make an adjustment for what I typically am working at. I'm usually working at 15 frames per second. There's not a decimal that is exact on that. It's a repeating decimal number. So it's 0.0666666666, because it's 1/15th, which is like half of a third of a tenth. It's a weird thing. But if it was 30 frames per second, then it would be 0.0333333333, because it's a third, which is 1 divided by 3, which is 0.3 repeating decimal, and it's a tenth of that. So you move over the decimal, but this is twice as long as 1/15th of a second, so it's 0.0666 is like the approximate of it. And to do that, I click the first frame in this bottom timeline, hold shift, click the last one, and then click next to the little number down here, click other, and then manually enter my speed. And that drop down menu in the upper right, where before we selected make frames from layers, with these all selected, hit reverse frames, and now it will be in the proper order, which doesn't really affect too much for the abstract stuff. The playback speed won't be accurate. It'll be like it'll be slower and a little bit jerkier, and you'll get an even more exaggerated version of that in the preview. Right now this is 1920 by 1080. There are a few different ways that you can save stuff out from here. If I'm saving for an animated GIF, that's again in that export save for web, but instead of selecting JPEG there, you select GIF. And there's a whole lot of stuff that you can deal with that. Most of the time, it's not practical to save for an animated GIF. There's not too many applications of it nowadays. What you're more likely to want to do is save out a few different possible ways. You can save out, where is it? It's export, render video. Photoshop used to have a few options for what you could save out for video, but it got sort of nerfed. You can't do as much with it, less robust than what it used to be. But you have a number of options when you go File, Export, Render Video. You can do Adobe Media Encoder, and it just gives you 3 options: DPX, QuickTime, H.264, and a few different presets, some frame rate, the scale, and some other things in the mix. But typically if I'm exporting, I want to have more options for what I save out in the video files, so I'll usually just export it as a Photoshop image sequence. Here it's a little bit weird for the frame rate saving it out. It'll be a little finicky, so I usually will adjust this to be 0.1 second and save it with the render video for a frame rate of 10 FPS. It's a nice clean thing. You get like a very loose idea, but that's just saving out those individual frames as stills. If you've done any work or adjustments that you want to save out from Photoshop for that, and then import those into Premiere or into After Effects. It's a lot of different steps and different approaches that you can take. What works best for you isn't going to be what works best for me. But that's more or less the sort of workflow that I go for. And if you were saving out the animated GIFs, then you can have it as something like these guys, which works well for OBS. It's a more accurate frame rate than trying to play back through Photoshop or something else, and it's native to where I'm working in those moments. Photoshop is good for making adjustments for individual frames, piece by piece, if you need to clean something up or something like that, or adjust the alignment. That's really annoying to do in Premiere or After Effects, because you'd have to enter in additional keyframes for adjustment layers and such. Well, not adjustment layers, but for like transformation and things. Photoshop also just is a little bit better for 2D animation. If you're doing something like onion skinning, you can use a timeline for that. But all of these being said, for creating the grid and all that, to expedite that process, because when I've done other things in the past, like scanning something and then copying or cropping each individual frame, that can be time consuming. The advantage of this is that I have a format set up to where I can save out the individual frames and render them in order relatively quickly. I don't have a better way to approach this without doing more programming or coding. um, using something that would. I've done some stuff with Python, or what's the other one called? It's like something that's real straightforward of a name. I forget. I haven't touched it in a while. You could also, this is set up more or less like a sprite sheet. So if you have everything aligned correctly, you can play it back in a way that adjusts the position if you're more comfortable with programming things, either like an After Effects or Premiere or something. The issue there is that when you have images this large, After Effects and Premiere aren't built to work with those images. Like it maxes at like 5,000 wide or something. And so it's something where, like, for my workflow, this is the best process that I've found currently. I might find a better one later on. If you are working larger and each frame, and like you're drawing on a frame that's larger and scanning it, each individual frame, then I would probably just skip using Photoshop entirely and import the image sequence into Premiere or After Effects, which you can do by import. And then in the window, there's usually like a few options underneath that you can like click to view, and one of them will be image sequence. And that's much easier to work with than trying to do something in Photoshop or trying to bring in a bunch of images and crop them down and then save those out in sequence. Hopefully that's helpful. Without having more of my computer visible, I don't know that there's a better way to talk through it. But that's what I've developed for doing these things. It's the fastest that I have, and I think it could be faster, but I don't know what that process is. Depending on what printer you're using to scan, you should know what size, do the math to figure out what size you need to draw at to import at a high enough resolution for what you want as the final thing. These max out for what's practical for me. Scanning in color with my scanner at 1200 dpi is manageable. 2400, it tends to sort of act up a little bit, and so I could scan at 2400 dpi and then have these as 4K, because it doubles up the height and width, so it's 4 times, and that's what you 4K to, or 1080 to 4K is that, because 1080 is 1920 by 1080 and 4K is 2160 by 3840, 3840, which is just twice either of those measurements, or dimensions rather. But when I scan at 2400 dpi, it gets finicky, and this is like the balance that I've arrived at for the work that I'm doing. What else was I thinking with that? Oh, also how slow my computer is working with these files. It's 4 times the resolution, which means that instead of being 12,000 wide, it would be 2400 wide. Sorry, 24,000 wide and 18,000 tall. So it's just a very large file to be working on. A little desktop guy that I got. It's not a little desktop, but while streaming and stuff, this is the comfort level that I've arrived at. You got any questions? I can clarify things. I tend to talk associatively because that's how I think, and with that, I skip over some stuff or go on tangents about information that really isn't what people are wanting to, not information that people need. Hopefully that's helpful. If not, I at least talk through it again, something that I understand enough to explain. I was trying to explain something to someone recently and realized that I didn't know what I was talking about, but I feel like I know what I'm talking about, or that I know the subject matter. But once someone asks a follow-up question, I'm like, I had a feeling that it felt like this was the answer, but I don't actually know an answer. Oh, I see into that too. The live is available. Any live that I've been streaming here, available for playback on YouTube. I've got a selection. You can watch me do these sort of things. Speaking of those things, though, I'll do a self-promotional bit now. If you want to watch this stream in full or other streams in full from this year and moving forward until I change how I do stuff, they're here on YouTube. If you go under live, there's a selection of lives with a little bit of an explanation. With the frequency that I'm doing these, I get a little bit burnt out on trying to go in depth about each explanation or different things for what each video has, like content wise, because processing and doing all this stuff, I'm like, this is enough. And anyway, so it's a little bit difficult to navigate. Maybe at some point I'll take the time and like more in detail be like, this one features this and that, but with the frequency of it, there's a lot. And so anyway, you can look and see what I've done for live streams there on YouTube, as well as time-lapse versions of the work. That's a little bit more clear. If you want to buy stuff from me, you can go to my web store, traceloops.com/store. If you want to purchase something and have it shipped outside of the U.S., you can email me, traceloops@traceloops.com. You can also email me with comments, concerns, questions, curiosities, commissions, etc., etc. Again, that is traceloops@traceloops.com. If you want to follow me on other platforms, you can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, Tumblr, Spotify, all of those places. I am Traceloops, TRECELOOPS. If you want to support me on Patreon, this is where I'm coming back around on it. You can do so by going to patreon.com/traceloops, where you will find at the lowest tier older recordings of live streams. You'll also find high-resolution versions of artwork that I create during streams. In the case of this one, all the scans that I took today, you find those files just right there on Patreon in digital form as to do with what you want, but not commercially or for profit, that sort of deal, or self-promotion. But if you want to check it out and use it for personal use, feel free. You'll also find a selection of tutorials, and that's what I was sort of hinting at before. The tutorials, it's a mix of things. I've been meaning to do a more in-depth, like very much you can take the files that I've given you and the instruction and use them to create an animation like this. Selection of tutorials are there that deals with just like my general animation flow when I have larger stills that I'm working with that are like 9x6 and scanning those in and putting them into Premiere. And because I'm not streaming when I'm doing that, I can record my full screen and edit things down, make sure that no weird info is popping up or personal information, stuff like that. So that's patreon.com/traceloops. At higher tier, that's a baseline entry thing. That's $3 a month. And then if you come to higher tiers, you get new songs from me weekdays, like what you were hearing before. It's all music that I've made. These are selections that work well for background on stream and don't have any copywritten stuff in them, which is why I made these three. But I have other songs that I make and then eventually like boil down and refine. That's what goes out publicly, but all of this stuff is on Patreon, and that's the mid-tier. And then at the highest tier, you get all of that aforementioned stuff, as well as an original postcard from me with artwork on the front, or a postcard from me with original artwork on the front, little message on the back. That's monthly. And you also get a discount to that web store that I mentioned earlier on. It is Tuesday. Don't have anything set for tomorrow afternoon, so I should be streaming again. I need to figure out if I want to do another one of these, also where I'm at in my long form animation using all of these guys, and whether or not I need to sort of transition back to a different format so it functions as one huge loop. But yeah. And then I think that's it. Thanks for watching, and hope you have a good afternoon, evening, morning, night, wherever you're at, whatever time it is. Hope it's good for you. I'm going to head out. Adios. I have to log back in. I realize I gotta. Sorry, I was gonna have a smooth logging out deal, but I got logged out of YouTube for a second, and I can't end the stream without getting back in. Okay, now it's time to say goodbye. Adios.